Imagine yourself traveling back in time to London on a sweltering, breathless day in June 1815, where the atmosphere was so thick that even a small spark from a false rumor could incinerate an entire fortune. At this moment, Britain was not only facing a military showdown at Waterloo, but was also engaged in a life-and-death gamble on the stock exchange. This was a time when the fate of an entire empire lay not in the hands of politicians at Downing Street, nor entirely under the sword of the Duke of Wellington, but hung suspended on war reports crossing the English Channel. If Napoleon Bonaparte, the proud little corporal of France, won, the British government bonds, consols, held by London gentlemen would instantly turn into nothing more than scrap paper, and the vision of Britain becoming a mere province of France would loom clearly. Conversely, if Wellington triumphed, Britain would rise like a dragon, dominating the oceans and the global economy for a century. In a setting where every heart beat like a war drum, information was no longer just power, it was the grim reaper or the savior, and the speed of information was worth more than the gold bars sitting in the central bank's vaults. Amidst that chaotic crowd, dripping with sweat and eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, appeared a figure who looked nothing like a messianic hero. That was Nathan Rothschild, the man leaning against his usual pillar at the stock exchange with a face that could be described in one word: deplorable. Nathan was not a man for show. He wore no brilliant silk robes or medals, but every breath, every twitch of his brow at that moment carried the weight of a cavalry division. The Rothschild family, already famous as the living internet of the 19th century, had cast a network of information relay stations across Europe, from Frankfurt to Paris, from Vienna to London. They did not play games of chance with the Royal Mail, which was as slow as a snail and riddled with bureaucratic red tape. Instead, they invested in the fastest horses, the most reckless couriers, and especially pigeons with elite homing capabilities. Nathan stood there, as silent as a rock in a whirlpool, but inside that cold head was earth-shattering information he had just received from an agent named Rothworth. The man who had ridden like a madman from the Waterloo battlefield to the French coast, then crossed the sea amidst a storm to deliver a tiny scrap of paper. That paper held only a few words, but it was enough to change the world order. Napoleon is defeated. Wellington has won. Normally, an average greedy man would scream aloud or secretly hoard all the stocks immediately to wait for the price to rise. But no, Nathan Rothschild was no ordinary merchant. He was the genius director of a play titled Belief. He understood that to devour the entire London Stock Exchange, he didn't need to buy right now. He needed the world to be so terrified that they would hand over their assets to him for a pittance. And so, the play began. Nathan started ordering his agents to sell. Yes, you heard that right. He dumped every British government bond he had in his hands. Seeing Nathan's doomsday expression, the crowd began to whisper, and the whispering turned into a horrific scream. "Look! Nathan is selling! My God, Rothschild knows something. Wellington must have lost. Napoleon is marching on London!" Panic spread like a highly toxic virus. Investors, already faint-hearted, fell into a state of mental delirium. They thought if the giant Rothschild was fleeing, then who were they to hold on to the debt papers of a collapsing government? A horrific wave of selling erupted. The price of British bonds plummeted uncontrollably, falling from a towering peak to the bottom of the abyss in just a few hours. People trampled over one another to sell, to escape the financial quagmire they believed was about to explode. Amidst this hell-on-earth scene, Nathan still stood there, silent and cold, like a butcher patiently waiting for the prey to walk into the slaughterhouse. He had hacked the most important human source code, herd mentality and the fear of death. But in the shadows of the exchange, when prices had dropped to the level of cheap trash, Nathan gave a discreet signal to a network of other secret agents, those who had been hiding silently in the dark corners until now. And then, a quiet takeover began. Every bond discarded by the crowd in despair was silently swept up by Nathan. He was buying back an entire nation, buying the future of the British Empire for the price of a bowl of thin porridge. This arson by Nathan was so cunning that it wasn't until the next morning, when official news of the victory arrived in London via the formal mail, that the entire stock exchange was stunned. Bonds skyrocketed to an all-time high, and Nathan Rothschild instantly became Britain's largest creditor. Look at this bitter paradox. While British soldiers were shedding blood at Waterloo to defend their country, in London, their pockets were picked clean by a man who didn't even need a gun. Nathan proved that a sorrowful face can be more powerful than a cannon's mouth, and information arrived a day early can defeat a legendary emperor. This was not just stock speculation. It was the quietest financial coup in history. This deception was so great that it laid the foundation for the Rothschilds' unrivaled power for hundreds of years to follow, where they would lend money not just to individuals, but to monarchs and empires to wage further wars. Nathan taught humanity a bloody lesson about artificial stability. Money is never a solid foundation if you do not possess information. You think you hold assets? Oh no, you only hold a belief, and when Wizard Nathan waves his information wand, that belief turns into his gold, or your trash. The story of Waterloo is not just a military story. It is the starting point of an era where financial corporations began to stand above nations, where carrier pigeons silently laid the first bricks for the global financial control system we are still breathlessly chasing today. To understand why Nathan Rothschild could so calmly perform his sorrowful face play in London, we must turn back the wheels of time to a narrow house in the Frankfurt ghetto. There, the patriarch Mayer Amschel Rothschild sat drawing a military map, not with swords and spears, but with numbers. Mayer was more than just a shrewd money dealer. He was the architect of a family empire whose ambitions spanned the entire continent. With terrifyingly long-sighted vision, he sent his 5 sons, 5 sharp arrows, to 5 of Europe's most strategic directions. Amschel stayed in Frankfurt to guard the routes. Solomon went to Vienna to whisper into the ears of Austrian emperors. Kallman headed to Naples to seize southern Italy. James landed in magnificent Paris. And of course Nathan, the craftiest of all, staked his claim in London, the financial heart of the world. This was not merely a migration, but the establishment of humanity's first living internet, in an era when people still used candles for light. The 5 Rothschild brothers were not just bankers. They were 5 nodes in a closed internal communication network, where family loyalty was harder than cold steel. Imagine the early 19th century, when a vital piece of information from the border had to travel thousands of miles to reach the center of power. It had to pass through countless royal post stations with tedious procedures, aging horses, and officials who preferred sipping afternoon tea to working. Meanwhile, the House of Rothschild operated a private information highway. They built secret relay stations along major arteries, owned agile fleets capable of slipping through any naval blockade, and most notably, a pigeon army with a transmission speed that the aristocracy of the time could only dream of. Every time a Rothschild pigeon took flight, it wasn't just wings beating the air. It was the movement of massive cash flows preparing to crash down upon the stock exchange. They had hacked the harshest law of finance. The one who arrives a second early holds destiny, while the one a second late is left to pick up the scraps falling from the winner's banquet. For this family, war was not a tragedy, but a high-risk investment project with a profit ceiling that didn't exist. They understood that when cannons roared, nations would become exhausted and ready to kneel before anyone with enough gold to feed their armies. It was this unprecedented communication network that turned them into ghosts on the trading floor. While generals were preoccupied with deploying troops on paper maps, the Rothschild brothers knew the exact financial state of their opponents through private codes that even the most talented spies could not crack. They did not grow wealthy through luck or divine protection. They grew wealthy because they possessed what every empire of that era lacked: absolute information synchronization. 5 brothers in 5 cities, acting as a single brain, creating a financial golden hoop tightening around all of Europe. They turned gentle pigeons into messengers of power, war horses into money-printing machines, and the chaos of war into a new order. An order where the House of Rothschild stood at the summit, smiling as they watched governments struggle with obsolete postal letters, moving as slowly as tortoises in the midst of a raging financial storm. Now, let us step into that fateful night before financial history was overturned, where the monetary version of the Trojan Horse strategy was orchestrated by Nathan Rothschild with such sophistication that it still sends shivers down one's spine. On the night of June 18, 1815, the Battle of Waterloo had just ended amidst the roar of cannons and the collapse of France's elite army. On the scene, a secret Rothschild agent named Rothworth witnessed the moment Napoleon fled. Without a second's hesitation, he rode like a ghost through the night, crossing roads filled with mud and corpses to reach the coast of Ostend. There, while the official military postal ships were busy waiting for the storm to clear and orders from superiors, churning vessel chartered privately to deliver one man and a single scrap of paper. Early on the morning of June 20, Nathan Rothschild received the news of the victory. This time, all of London was still living in a state of overwhelming terror. False rumors spread through every alleyway that Wellington had been destroyed and that French troops were preparing to land on English soil. This was the moment Nathan unleashed his Trojan Horse. But instead of a wooden horse full of soldiers, he used his own reputation and influence to create a massive illusion. Nathan strolled into the stock exchange and leaned against his usual stone pillar with a face of terrifying stillness. Sorrow as if he had just lost his closest kin. He did not utter a single word, but that silence was a lethal psychological blow. Suddenly, Nathan signaled his agents to begin dumping stock, recklessly, and purge everything related to British public debt before it turned to ash. The surrounding crowd began to hold its breath, and then panic erupted like a wildfire. They told themselves, "Look, Nathan, the man who holds all of Europe's secrets, is selling off. Wellington must have lost. England is finished." This was the core of the strategy. Nathan didn't deceive them with words. He deceived them using the very fear that was waiting to explode in their hearts. He created a self-destructing market where every citizen of London became an accomplice to this grand deception. British government bond prices went into a free fall, plunging at a terrifying speed never before seen in history. People trampled over one another, screaming to offload their holdings, accepting pennies on the dollar for their life's assets because they believed that by tomorrow, Napoleon would arrive to confiscate everything. Amidst that chaotic, maddening scene where even the most seasoned investors were weeping, Nathan's Trojan horse began to reveal itself. In the dark corners of the exchange, through another team of secret intermediaries, whom no one knew worked for the House of Rothschild, Nathan began to silently swallow up every debt note being discarded. He bought quietly and subtly, out from the belly of the wooden horse under the cover of night to open the city gates. For every bond the panicked crowd threw away, Nathan picked it up and tucked it into his pocket. By the end of the day, when the trading session closed in the tragedy of the entire London financial world, Nathan Rothschild effectively held control over nearly the entire public debt of the British Empire. He didn't just own money, he had seized the future of a nation. This deception succeeded so perfectly because it relied on a simple truth. Humans more easily believe in a disaster they long feared than in good news they hadn't dared to dream of. Nathan used their belief against them, turning British loyalty and fear into the tools for one of the most brilliant and legal financial heists ever recorded in the annals of human history. On the morning of June 21, 1815, as the sunrise began to dissipate London's characteristic mist, it was also the moment Nathan Rothschild's play reached its climax. Glorious for him, but devastatingly cruel for all who had dared to believe in his sorrowful face the day before. A trumpet blared from the government office, and official news from the battlefield of Waterloo struck London like a seismic shock. Wellington had won a resounding victory. Napoleon was utterly defeated and in full flight. In that instant, the stock exchange exploded, not with panic this time, but with sheer, staggering bewilderment. The price of British government bonds, consols, didn't just rise, they set fire and soared into the sky like a rocket, surpassing even pre-war levels. Those who had been whaling and selling off yesterday stood frozen, realizing that the scrap paper they had discarded in despair had just turned into solid diamonds. And who held all those diamonds? 24 hours. Nathan had executed the greatest wealth pivot in human history. From a pile of public debt regarded as trash beneath the feet of a panicked crowd, he transformed them into a financial empire without borders. The profits from the Waterloo gamble were so immense that they didn't just enrich the Rothschild family, they turned them into the banker of bankers. Nathan didn't just win money, he won the ultimate power to control the money supply of Britain. From that moment on, the Bank of England effectively fell under the shadow of the Rothschild office at New Court. Their wealth grew so vast that people began to whisper, "The House of Rothschild can create peace or war, depending on whether they open or close their safes." The long-term impact of this hack was far more terrifying than the numbers on the ledgers. It established a new world order, where the power of money began to stand above the crowns of kings. The Rothschild family became the financial general managers for the great projects of the 19th century, from financing transcontinental railroads and mining massive gold deposits in South Africa, to lending the U.S. government funds to pay for future wars. They were no longer just loophole-seeking merchants. They had become uncrowned politicians. These were men who could dictate the rise and fall of a nation with a single coded message sent to their brothers in Paris or Vienna. The Waterloo Deception taught the elite a lesson that remains valid today. In the world of finance, reality is less important than the perception of reality. If you can control how the masses perceive events, you can turn trash into gold, and vice versa. Nathan Rothschild used the scrap paper of a government on the brink of bankruptcy to build an empire on which the sun never set, a tangled financial web enveloping all human economic activity. To this very day, the shadow of this family still looms behind crises and major geopolitical events, reminding us that behind the heroic slogans of freedom or ideals, there is always a balance sheet quietly at work, and whoever possesses information earliest is the one who writes history. Let us close this historical performance by shining a light on the crime scene evidence left behind by the Rothschilds, revealing that the modern financial world we inhabit is essentially just a sophisticated upgrade of what transpired in London in 1815. Hack lies not in the colossal sum Nathan earned, but in a brutal asset management philosophy. In a debt-based system, the one who controls information and cash flow holds the power of life and death, not kings or presidents. The Rothschild family transformed their dominance into a kind of shadow legacy, setting a gold standard for the global financial elite. Always position yourself so that no matter which side wins a war, you are the one collecting the interest. The price of this dominance is the formation of an entity we now call the military financial complex. Looking at reality today, you can see the shadow of Nathan Rothschild in every heartbeat of the modern stock market. When a high-frequency trading (HFT) algorithm closes a trade microseconds faster than a competitor, it is the direct descendant of those carrier pigeons of old. When hedge funds short an entire economy based on a political rumor, it is a carbon copy of that sorrowful face leaning against the stone pillar on the London floor. World where crises are no longer disasters for everyone. They become massive wealth harvests, where money flows from the pockets of the panicked into the hands of those who already knew the script. The ultimate irony is that after more than 200 years, the public remains mesmerized by heroic slogans of patriotism or justice, while the actual bill for every historical upheaval is always paid with their labor and tax money. The Rothschilds taught us that to become immortal in the world of finance, you don't need to be the best. You simply need to be the only one holding the key to information at the exact moment everyone else is losing their way. Their dominance was maintained not through violence, but through a web of debt and dependency that no revolution has ever been able to fully dismantle. As we conclude our journey tracing the Rothschild money trail, we realize a harsh truth. Financial history is a loop of exploited trust and monopolized wisdom. Nathan Rothschild closed the chapter on the era of physical gold to usher in the age of debt power. The final lesson he left for us, those of us breathlessly chasing inflation and interest rate figures, is to always keep a cool head and a heart full of skepticism. Because at the banquet of empires, if you don't understand who is sitting at the head of the table dealing the cards, then very likely your own account is the main course on that menu. Always remember, blood may be spilled on the battlefield to change borders, but only the silent flows of information truly change who masters the world. The journey of deconstructing the mysterious industries of Nathan Rothschild, for more pre-explain them changing people together, but brief the supported by this one will be taking about the best month most of them, because this footed is well money that no resident will be torted. The journey of Describe them America as financial history continues. Are you ready to discover how Mansa Musa, the richest king of all time, accidentally collapsed the economy of an entire region simply through his excessive generosity in the next episode?